A coalition of 4 massive Eastern empires has just swept through the region like a scythe, crushing local kings and dragging away captives, including Abram's own nephew, Lot. Abram doesn't send diplomats. He arms 318 men from his household, chases this imperial army over 100 miles into the pitch-black night, and absolutely routs them. As Abram marches back south, he stands as the unrivaled military superpower of Canaan. In a single night, he has broken the spine of 4 empires, pivoting from wealthy nomad to the region's dominant force. He descends into the valley of Shaveh, a flat, dusty expanse. He is covered in the grime of war, holding absolute leverage over the region. He is vibrating with the adrenaline of a violent victory. And as he stands there at the peak of human dominance, he is about to confront a man who breaks every rule of how the ancient world operates. 2 figures step out of the dust to meet him. The first is Bera, the king of Sodom. He immediately tries to strike a political deal, offering Abram the wealth in exchange for the captured people. It is the language of a transaction, built on exploitation. But before Abram can even answer him, a second figure steps into the valley. Genesis chapter 14 introduces him with jarring, absolute suddenness: Melchizedek. In Hebrew, his name is a compound of 2 words, Melech, meaning king, and Sedek, meaning righteousness or moral justice. Ancient monarchs were usually butchers who constructed ziggurats on the backs of slaves. For a ruler to hold the literal title King of Righteousness meant he was operating on a completely different frequency than every other warlord on the planet. Then look at his domain. He is the King of Salem. The Hebrew word is shalem, the ancient root of shalom. We usually translate shalom as peace, thinking of it as a quiet absence of conflict. But in the original Hebrew, it describes an active structural condition where nothing is missing and nothing is broken. Abram has just returned from a war that fractured the entire region. Walking toward him out of the dust is a man who embodies wholeness and the restoration of perfect design. The most shocking part of this man's introduction is his second title. The text calls him the priest of God Most High. If you map the timeline of the Bible, that title should make your brain stutter. This is Genesis 14. The tribe of Levi hasn't even been conceived yet. Aaron won't be born for centuries. There is no tabernacle, no bronze altar, and no book of Leviticus to outline the rules of sacrifice. We often assume the plan for redemption was exclusive to Abraham's bloodline, and that the rest of the world was disconnected from the Creator. Yet Melchizedek approaches without a sword, brings out bread and wine, and speaks a blessing. He calls God El Elyon, the possessor of heaven and earth. He introduces a new cosmic vocabulary, reminding Abram that the power to win the battle came directly from the architect of the universe. Standing right here in a Canaanite valley is a fully functioning, legitimate high priest. It proves God's blueprint for redemption was already active, operating outside human-built religious structures long before the nation of Israel ever existed. Abram's reaction to this blessing defies his own military superiority. He doesn't argue, he doesn't claim the victory for himself. Instead, he reaches into the spoils of the war he just fought. In the ancient world, you only pay tithes to someone greater than yourself. You only hand over your wealth when bowing to a higher authority. Abram pulls out exactly 1/10 of everything he recovered and physically hands it over to this mysterious priest. Abram is the man holding the covenant. He was personally promised by God that his name would be great. Yet here, the man with the promise bows down in the dirt to the man with the presence. That single submission validates Melchizedek's priesthood as ancient and untouchable. Abram recognized a spiritual weight that superseded his own newly minted covenant and the entire Levitical system that would eventually follow it. And just like that, the scene is over. There is no further conversation. Abram walks out of the king's valley, and Melchizedek vanishes into the deep shadows of Genesis. Genesis is a book obsessed with ancestry. It relies on genealogies to track the movement of God's plan, painstakingly detailing who begot whom and where they were buried. But when it comes to Melchizedek, the author goes completely silent. He records no father, no mother, no ancestral line. There is no record of his birth, and absolutely no record of his death. For 1,000 years, the biblical record leaves him buried in antiquity. Not a single prophet speaks his name. The author intentionally curated this void. By stripping away human data, Melchizedek becomes a phantom, with no beginning and no end. This historical absence was engineered. It was designed to become a theological blueprint. A millennium later, a king sitting on a throne in the newly conquered city of Jerusalem picks up a pen. Staring over the exact same valley where that ancient meeting took place, David writes a cryptic oath. In Psalm 110, David prophesies that the coming Messiah will not be a temporary priest from the bloodline of Aaron. He will be a priest forever, belonging to the mysterious, unbreakable order of Melchizedek. 2,000 years before the Last Supper, this mysterious phantom priest brought out bread and wine to celebrate a victory. He set a table that Jesus himself would eventually sit at, fulfilling that ancient schematic. This diagram shows a finite timeline of the Levitical priesthood. Because that system was bound by human ancestry and death, it had an end. But when the infinite order of Melchizedek intersects it, it permanently supersedes and replaces the old system. Melchizedek functions as the master blueprint for the entire New Testament. His presence proves that the Messiah's authority is an unshakable anchor, one that predates the law and outlasts time itself. Picture ancient Jerusalem at night. The Mediterranean wind carries the scent of burning cedar and roasted meat from the temple courtyard. Down there, the sons of Aaron are working the night shift. They are slaughtering lambs, catching blood in bronze basins, and keeping the fires burning. It is a grueling, visceral, endless conveyor belt. But this entire sacrificial system has a fatal flaw. The priests keep dying. A high priest can carefully sew golden bells to his garment and step behind the heavy veil to intercede for the nation. But his time is always running out. Eventually, his heart stops. The bells go silent. He is buried in the dust, his son takes his place, and the cycle of decay starts all over again. You cannot build an eternal kingdom if the men standing between you and God are trapped in the grave. You are placing your security in the hands of a decaying mediator. King David watches this system from his palace window. He looks at a massive religious infrastructure designed around a physical building and a specific bloodline. David knows the Messiah is coming from his own royal bloodline, the tribe of Judah. But the tribe of Judah has no right to the altar. The law of Moses is explicit. Only the sons of Levi can serve as priests. If the Messiah walks into that temple to make an offering, the law demands he be struck down as an intruder. David is facing a direct contradiction in God's own law. To be the ultimate king, the Messiah must be a son of Judah, but to be the ultimate priest, he would have to be a son of Levi. Under the current system, these two identities can never inhabit the same man. The resolution comes when David is invited to overhear a conversation happening outside of time. It is a decree within the Godhead, the Father speaking to the Son. David picks up his pen and writes Psalm 110. He records a specific, divine promise. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. To make this happen, God takes an oath. In the ancient world, God's word alone spoke galaxies into existence. But here, he raises his right hand and binds his own character to this declaration, swearing that he will never change his mind. This oath reaches back past the law of Moses and the blood of bulls and goats. It pulls forward a phantom priest from the shadows of Genesis, a king of righteousness with no record of birth or death. For 10 centuries, the temple choirs sang these words, and the scribes copied them perfectly, letter by letter. They were unaware that they were preserving the very document that would one day render their religious monopoly obsolete. Fast forward to Jesus of Nazareth, standing in the temple courts in Jerusalem. He is surrounded by the Pharisees and scribes, the gatekeepers of the system. They demand to know by what authority he operates. They have checked his background. He is a carpenter from Galilee, from the tribe of Judah. In their eyes, he has no right to forgive sins or teach like a priest. Jesus turns the conversation to this exact psalm. He asks them how the Messiah can be David's son if David himself, speaking by the Spirit, calls the Messiah Lord. If the Messiah is David's Lord, his authority cannot be derived from David's earthly lineage. He is pointing to a priesthood that predates the temple and David's own crown. The religious leaders are silent because they understand the legal implication. If Jesus is the priest-king David saw, his right to the altar doesn't come from their records or their temple. It comes from an eternal oath bypassing the tribe of Levi entirely, making their sacrifices redundant. To protect their institutions, they drag Jesus outside the city walls to these rocky hillsides. They believe that by silencing a rogue teacher from Judah, they are securing the sanctity of their temple. They didn't realize they were fulfilling the prophecy they were trying to stop. That shedding his blood, they were completing his role as the ultimate Passover lamb. When Jesus breathes his last, the God of the universe reaches down and violently tears the temple veil in two, from top to bottom. The old system is finished. The separation between humanity and the most holy place has been physically and spiritually dismantled. But a torn veil presents a final problem. In the old ritual, the death of the lamb was only the beginning. The high priest still had to carry the blood past the veil to present it in the presence of God. Even resurrected, Jesus is still from the tribe of Judah. If he walked into that earthly building in Jerusalem to present his blood, he would be an unauthorized intruder in a shadow of the real thing. Because he belongs to the indestructible order of Melchizedek, he doesn't enter a building made by human hands. He leaves the earth entirely to enter the cosmic sanctuary. This is why your security is permanent. Because this high priest possesses an indestructible life, he is an anchor for your soul that can never be moved. God drew a line in the sand for ancient Israel. If you hold the scepter as a king, you come from the tribe of Judah. If you hold the incense as a priest, you come from the tribe of Levi. The two offices never touch. Crossing that line is a capital offense. King Uzziah tested that limit. He was a successful, powerful ruler who walked into the temple and demanded to burn incense on the golden altar. 80 priests stood as a human wall to block him, warning him he was trespassing. In the second he refused to back down, leprosy broke out on his forehead. The king was forced into permanent isolation, cut off from his throne and the house of God for the rest of his life. This creates a structural crisis for the promised Messiah. The covenant dictates the Messiah must be a king from the tribe of Judah to rule forever. But a king can only change the government. He can win battles and pass laws, but he cannot walk behind the heavy veil to make atonement for sin. If the Messiah is only a king, he remains legally barred from the presence of God, leaving humanity without a mediator. From his palace window, David looks out over the valley at night. He is a student of the Torah, and he sees the wall the law has built. He knows that his own crown, no matter how powerful, cannot grant him entry to the Holy of Holies. The records of the Levitical priesthood are exhaustive. The rigid, dense columns of Hebrew text dictate every requirement for approaching the altar, making the priesthood a matter of strict biology. To solve this crisis, God isn't going to break the law. He'll bypass it. To save humanity, the Messiah must inherit a different authority, an order that existed before the law was even a whisper on Mount Sinai. David's eyes settle on the valley of Shaveh. He is looking at the site of a midnight encounter that happened thousands of years earlier. The patriarch Abram has just hunted down the armies of 4 empires. He is exhausted, his hands are stained with the ash and blood of a midnight slaughter, and he is standing in a graveyard of human ambition. Out of the shadows walks Melchizedek, the King of Salem. In ancient Hebrew, his title is the King of Shalom, the active restoration of wholeness. It is the work of taking a world that is fractured and bleeding and returning it to its original design. In the ancient Near East, religion ran on blood. To approach the divine, something had to die. Yet Melchizedek, the first person in the Bible to be called a priest of God Most High, does not bring a sword or a sacrifice. He brings bread and wine. Centuries before the law of Moses was carved into stone, Melchizedek offered a meal of joy and covenant to a blood-stained conqueror. He was operating on a frequency the Levitical law couldn't even comprehend. David picks up his pen and records a conversation happening within the Godhead itself. He writes Psalm 110, a cosmic, unbreakable oath sworn by the Creator to the coming king. The oath declares the Messiah a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. The throne and the altar are bridged and unified. This priesthood is not based on genealogy or a legal requirement, but on an indestructible life. This is the formal mechanism for a takeover. It gives the coming king the right to claim the altar and the scepter at the same time, reaching back past the law of Moses to an ancient, superior authority. 2,000 years later, a man sits in an upper room in Jerusalem. The city was built over the ruins of ancient Salem, and the shadow of execution is creeping under the door. Outside, the religious establishment is preparing to kill him. Just blocks away, the sacrificial machinery of the temple is in full motion, slaughtering animals to cover human sin. Jesus of Nazareth ignores the temple requirements. He does not ask for a lamb or the blood of a bull. He takes bread and breaks it. He takes a cup of wine. He is reaching back to the King's Valley, using the exact elements Melchizedek served to Abram 2 millennia earlier. This was not a new invention. Jesus was seating himself at Melchizedek's table and claiming the dual title of king and priest. He was officially triggering the shift David had recorded in the Psalms. By claiming this priesthood, Jesus moved past the rigid religious laws that kept the throne and the altar apart. He broke the monopoly of the Levitical system. Because he is both king and priest, he is the first to walk into the presence of God as a mediator. He holds the scepter of authority and the bread of provision at the same time. The result is an atonement that no longer requires the shedding of animal blood. It is the restoration of what was broken, offering wholeness to a world dominated by violence. A moment of wonder. The mysterious appearance of a phantom priest in Genesis was the pattern that made the New Testament possible. It was the ancient architecture that guaranteed the arrival of a king who could finally bridge the gap between humanity and God. Stepping into the presence of a holy God is like walking into an unshielded nuclear reactor of divine purity. If a person brings corruption into that space, the radiant weight of that glory consumes them. Ancient texts describe a meticulously designed system meant to allow fragile humans to survive this encounter. For 1,500 years, the nation of Israel operated under the Levitical priesthood. The epicenter of that entire architecture was a single day on the calendar, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Picture the earthly high priest on that morning. For 7 days prior, he has been isolated in a chamber within the temple complex, separated from his family, rehearsing every meticulous step of the ritual. On the morning of the ceremony, he strips off his jeweled golden robes to dress for humility, putting on a simple, unadorned tunic of white linen. He takes a censer full of burning coals and drops handfuls of sweet incense onto the fire. He steps backward through the heavy woven veil into the pitch-black chamber of the most holy place. He is completely alone. He must fill the room with a thick cloud of smoke to create a barrier between his own fragile humanity and the blinding reality of the mercy seat. If the smoke clears, he dies. Outside in the courtyard, an entire nation holds its breath. They listen in dead silence for the faint, muffled ringing of the golden bells sewn to the hem of his garment. As long as the bells are ringing, the priest is moving. As long as he is moving, he is alive, and the nation's sins are covered for 1 more year. But the architecture of that earthly system contains a fatal flaw. The blood dries, the sins accumulate again the very next morning. The ritual has to be repeated year after bleeding year. And underneath his white linen, the high priest's heart is aging. Eventually, the bells go permanently silent. He is buried in the dust, his son takes his place, and the relentless, exhausting conveyor belt of death starts all over again. Humanity is left trapped, terrified of impermanence, relying on a physical tent that is destined to fail. To find the solution to this terrifying cycle, we have to look back 4,000 years to a startling anomaly in the ancient texts. A mysterious man walks onto the pages of Genesis out of nowhere, with no genealogy, no record of birth, and no record of death. He breaks the established rules of the earthly religious system. This figure steps out of the fog in the valley of Shave to meet the battle-weary patriarch Abraham. His name is Melchizedek. He carries two contradictory titles. He is the King of Salem, the King of Righteousness, holding absolute sovereign authority, and simultaneously he holds the title Priest of God Most High, offering mediation. Even more strange is his offering. 2 millennia before the Last Supper, he brings out a bloodless communion. A simple meal of bread and wine, setting a table that a future Messiah will sit at. Melchizedek serves as the secret prototype, proving that the throne and the altar, violently separated on earth, could be eternally fused together in one person. Centuries later, King David writes a cryptic prophecy based on an unbreakable divine oath. He declares that the coming Messiah will completely bypass the dying bloodline of Aaron. He will instead be a priest forever, according to this mysterious order of Melchizedek. When Jesus Christ breathes his last on the Roman cross, the earthly veil tears from top to bottom, shattering the temporary physical system. He carries his own blood, bypassing the dark rooms of Jerusalem entirely. He steps outside the boundaries of time, space, and matter. He walks directly into the true sanctuary, the uncreated dwelling place of God that exists beyond the physical realm. And then he does something that would have gotten an earthly high priest executed by heaven on the spot. He sits down. There were no chairs in the earthly tabernacle because an earthly priest's work was never finished. The blood was never enough. But taking his seat at the right hand of God proves the work of atonement is complete, the mediation is absolute, and the fragile architecture of the old world is now obsolete. This ancient cosmic architecture addresses the most basic human fear, impermanence. We instinctively look for a foundation that won't shift, but we usually anchor our lives to things made of sand. When the storm hits, a failing marriage, a medical scan, or the quiet spiral of anxiety at 2 a.m, the sand dissolves and we are left drifting. The writer of Hebrews understands this desperation. To explain our survival, he uses a nautical image. You are in a ship on a pitch-black ocean. A violent storm is tearing the deck apart, and the waves threaten to swallow you whole. Surviving the chaos requires rejecting the instinct to drop an anchor down into the dark, violent depths of the world around us. The writer describes an anchor that travels in an impossible direction. This anchor is hurled upward, tearing through the atmosphere, passing through the veil of heaven, and exiting the realm of the storm entirely. The text declares that this anchor enters the inner sanctuary. It hooks itself into the solid, unshakable bedrock of the throne of God. The one standing behind the veil, wrapping his scarred hands around the heavy iron chain of your life, is the phantom priest. Because he is the king, he holds authority over the storm. And because he is the priest, he covers your brokenness in his own blood. Eternal security is not found in managing religious performance or building towers to reach heaven. The storm is real, and the boat will shake, but the anchor is held by a permanent priest on ground that cannot move.